Thank you very much for a kind introduction, Ms. Takanashi. And first of all, let me express my sincere gratitude towards all the sponsors, METI, JOGMEC, and IETA, for giving me an opportunity to speak at this event. I'm very honored and excited to speak about CCS credit schemes around the world, already touched upon by my previous speakers. My presentation is mainly divided into three parts. First, I would like to make some introduction to my company, Mitsubishi Research Institute's involvement with CCS and carbon credit. And then I would divulge into CCS and carbon markets, the main topic of my presentation. And then as summary, I would like to touch upon some key takeaways from studying CCS and CCS crediting schemes around the world. Please allow me to briefly introduce my company, Mitsubishi Research Institute. MRI was founded in 1970 at the occasion of a 100-year anniversary of Mitsubishi Group. Now MRI is an independent company listed in Tokyo Stock Exchange. We are proud to say that we are one of the leading think tanks in Japan with over 800 researchers and consultants engaged in advisory service in a wide range of issues, serving both public and private sector clients. And our work involved is wide-ranging. It starts from advising on policy-making level to the actual implementation of projects. MRI has a long history of being involved in carbon market and also CCS. As far as carbon market in general is concerned, our main work has so far involved two main aspects. One is methodology development, which we started back in the early 2000s, starting with developing methodologies for CDM projects. Another main aspect of our carbon market work has been assisting private sector companies to develop the actual project and also go through the MRV to achieve credit generation. And to this end, we have supported a variety of projects in renewable energy and energy efficiency, and especially in the Southeast Asian region. And for CCS, we've also started our work quite early, starting in 2005 with methodology development for CDM. And we are also assisting some feasibility studies under the joint crediting schemes, starting in 2019. And we have also conducted numerous policy and business environment studies around the world. Let me dive into the main theme of my presentation now, CCS and carbon markets around the world. Firstly, as a background, I would like to touch upon the carbon market structure. It can roughly classified into cap and trade or emissions trading scheme and baseline and credit schemes. In cap and trade scheme, the amount of CO2 captured and stored is subtracted from the total emissions of a facility covered under the scheme, where calculated emission is used to determine whether the facility's emission falls within the given emission allowances prescribed by a regulation. And if your emissions fall under the allowed amount of emissions, then you can sell the gap, and if your emissions is above the allowed emissions amount, then you can purchase from an external entity. So this scheme gives rise to trading of carbon. And in baseline and credit schemes, the amount of CO2 captured and stored minus emissions from the project is credited and used by the project company itself or by a different company. And if it's if the credit goes to a different company, this is done through a purchase of offset. And this is most of the time, this is done on voluntary basis. I'd like to mention now that my presentation will focus on the baseline and credit schemes. The landscape of carbon market is quite complex, with many schemes around the world. On the demand side, public and regulatory schemes such as emission reduction targets by country or emission trading schemes, as I just mentioned, or sectoral targets like CORSIA for aviation sector allow using carbon credits as offsets to meet part of their reduction obligation. Some schemes restrict the offset use to country or region-specific programs, while other schemes like CORSIA allows for many types of credits, including voluntary credits, to as long as they meet certain standards. And corporates are using many types of credits, including both credits from government programs and of voluntary programs as well. On the supply side, we have mechanism based on international agreements, such as CDM, or programs that are emerging from Article 6.2 and 6.4 of Paris Agreement. And we also have country and regional specific programs such as Australia Carbon Credit Units or J Credit of Japan. And last but not least, we have many voluntary schemes such as VCS and ACR, which will be covered in this workshop. It is to be also noted that carbon credits are used as to offset remaining emissions of a user entity. And as already mentioned by my previous speaker, as such entity, more and more of these entities move closer towards their carbon neutrality goals. They will eventually need to, these remaining emissions will eventually need to be replaced by carbon removals. Now, let me share with you how positioning of CCS and carbon credit schemes have evolved. Before Paris Agreement, we had Kyoto Protocol as an international agreement to reduce carbon emissions, which gave birth to a carbon credit mechanism called Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM for short, as I've already mentioned CDM a number of times in my presentation. Consideration of CCS and CDM started in 2005, and rules as expressed in modalities and procedures were adopted in 2011. However, no project ever materialized under CDM for a variety of reasons. And you can see that there was a gap of about 6 years since the start of consideration of CCS and CDM and the adoption of the rules. So you can see that there was a lot of discussions going on at this time. In the mid-2010s, specific country or region programs adopted CCS, one of the project scopes for carbon credits. And we saw this trend emerging in areas like the US, Alberta, Canada, California in the US, and Australia, where there was some specific interest in from the industry in CCS projects. And in 2020s, now we are now seeing increasing cases of CCS methodology development in the voluntary scheme. And this, I believe, is emerging from the need of a wider range of regions and wider range of entities with interest in securing CCS credits to meet carbon neutrality goals. The following 3 slides explain the history of consideration of CCS in CDM. As I mentioned already, consideration of CCS and CDM started immediately after the Kyoto Protocol came into effect, and it was recognized in 2010 with rules being adopted in 2011. And so you can see there was some lengthy discussions at the time. And as a result of CDM decision to include CCS in the sectoral scope, a working group of CCS was established, but has never been convened as no submission has been made on specific project. Why? At the time, there was potentially a wide gap between requirements to ensure integrity and capability at the project side. Another reason is often said that often referred to as the decline of carbon market at the time. To give you some insight into the requirements set at the time for CDM, requirements included, for example, putting in place a legal system, conducting 20 years or more of monitoring after the end of crediting period, making advanced financial arrangements to ensure monitoring, and establishing liability scheme, among others. It also required 5% of credits to be reserved for using it to compensate for potential of leakage. Nevertheless, some important takeaways were gained through attempted CCS project development in CDM. In addition to the rules, modalities, and procedures I just mentioned, 2 CDM methodologies were proposed and underwent review. I would like to mention that these 2 methodologies were both led by the MRI, and they formed some of the earlier groundwork of accounting for CO2 emission reduction through CCS projects, with many common features with methodologies in existence or being proposed today. One of the methodologies proposed for CDM at the time, NM167, targeted CO2 EOR project, while the second, NM168, targeted storage in saline aquifers or abandoned oil and gas field. In NM167, it was established that emissions from produced oil is not counted as it would replace non-EOR oil. This concept was later adopted by other crediting schemes, such as ACR. So now we have the Paris Agreement, and many people are wondering whether CCS will be covered by carbon trading schemes under the Paris Agreement. I will not go much into detail as it will be elaborated by next speaker, except for a few points. First of all, the Glasgow Climate Pact at COP26 made a clear decision of phase down on unabated coal, implying for need for CCS in energy transition for many countries. No specific reference to CCS has been made in the Paris Rulebook. However, guidance on carbon removal, including provisions for geological storage, was discussed. At COP27, and it will continue to do so towards the next COP. And we shall wait and see how rules will be developed in this regard. For Article 6.2, which covers a more broader initiatives, it is up to each program. However, we should also look forward to learning more about Japan's joint crediting mechanism. It will also be shared by subsequent speakers at this workshop to this regard. Outside of international agreement-based scheme, there are several baseline and crediting schemes with CCS as one of the covered sectors. I selected ACR, American Carbon Registry, AEOS, Alberta Emission Offset Scheme from Canada, ERF, Emission Reduction Fund of Australia, and Pure Earth and VCS to show some similarity as well as differences between these schemes. First of all, looking at the purpose of the schemes, programs such as AEOS of Alberta, Canada, and Emission Reduction Fund of Australia were created to meet compliance target under a specific jurisdiction, while the others were purely developed for voluntary purpose. Regardless of their original purpose, many are used both for compliance and voluntary purpose. Regarding the legal framework requirements, country and regional specific programs naturally refer to laws and regulations of their respective jurisdiction as part of the applicability conditions for their methodologies. It is interesting to see, though, that Pure Earth, it's a voluntary scheme. It requires, it targets worldwide. However, it requires US or EU or equivalent regulations as the applicability condition for their projects. Excuse me. And for covered types of projects, ACR, AEOS cover CCS and CO2 under certain conditions. And Pure Earth also covers EOR under certain conditions as well. And it is interesting to note that Pure Earth is dedicated to creating negative emissions. So they cover CCS, however, only in the case of direct air capture and CCS ducts or bioenergy CCS specs. And ERF of Australia and VCS currently only target CCS. And all schemes require a credit buffer or reserve to address a potential leakage risk. ERF and Pure Earth have a blanket requirement of a certain percentage for all CCS projects, whereas VCS has a very unique risk assessment framework to determine the buffer on project-to-project basis. For monitoring regime, most schemes require monitoring after the end of a project or the end of CO2 injection. However, their durations differ. And for country or regional programs such as AEOS and ERF, we see a correlation with legal requirement of their respective jurisdiction. And for schemes such as ACR or VCS, not tied directly to any jurisdiction, the monitoring regime is set independently of the legal requirement. And most schemes refer to site closure and monitoring in relation to that. ACR, as I've observed, is a bit unique in a way that it does not refer directly to site closure, but mentions transfer of responsibility as the timing of the end of all risk management activities. Okay, I've already mentioned Pure Earth being unique in a way that it is the first voluntary crediting scheme dedicated to negative emissions, and it has created a methodology for geological carbon storage. And as already mentioned previously by myself and by my previous speaker as well, I think the rise in demand for these negative emission credits is also work as an incentive to promote CCS projects. For summaries, I would like to touch upon some common issues that need to be considered. And when you think about enabling more CCS project formulation under credit schemes, while also protecting integrity. From studying various schemes around the world, I have come to the understanding that schemes are regional schemes have been carefully designed, taking into account local circumstances and types of eligible CC activities, and to what extent long-term monitoring is required, I believe, are dependent on local energy transition needs and the conditions of local geological storage. So I believe in any future activities, look, I think the methodologies need to be designed so that local situation can be carefully taken into account. And avoidance of double counting is obviously an important factor, and CO2 ownership is considered in the schemes I've studied. A new emerging challenge may be that with the emergence of network model or hub and cluster model of CCS project, who monitors what for how long may be a major issue. And hub and cluster model or network model of CCS projects is very important and promising in a way for scaling up and reducing cost of CCS. However, it might have some repercussions on the monitoring, as I've mentioned. And some credit schemes covered in the presentation do not explicitly refer to such project type. But with the hope that carbon credit schemes become flexible to cover many areas as well as many project types, I expect further development in crediting methodologies to this regard. I would like to now conclude my presentation. Thank you again to the organizers and host for giving me this opportunity to speak, and thank you very much to the audience for your kind attention.
Ms. Shinchi, thank you for your great talk and informative presentation. And thank you for sharing the international discussion around crediting mechanism. And also thank you for useful comparison of several existing crediting schemes. We could learn a lot from existing schemes abroad and their methodologies. Thank you. Okay, and now I would like to invite questions for Ms. Shinji's presentation. Okay, so far we received one question. Thank you for the question. And Ms. Shinji, would you please answer the question? Question is, are there any development of carbon credit scheme for CCS in Southeast Asia?
Thank you, Ms. Takanashi, for the question. As for country or region-specific carbon schemes, I'm not aware of any CCS methodology or project in Southeast Asia. However, I understand the JCM, Joint Crediting Mechanism, between Japan and some Southeast Asian countries are considering to develop some CCS projects. And I believe some study has already been conducted on methodology development as well. And hopefully, my next following speakers will touch upon that.
Thank you very much. I have next question. If CCS credit issued under 6.4 article and authorized for international mitigation purposes bought by a company, is it possible that the country where this company is based could claim those credits toward their NDC?
Yes, if I understand the question, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but I believe that as long as it meets the conditions prescribed by the Paris Agreement, such as corresponding adjustment, it can be the credits can be transferred from one country to another, and it can be claimed by the purchasing or the acceptance side of the credits.
Thank you. There is one more. Now, where can we find the BCS approved methodology for CCS?
I'm sorry, I apologize for not being clear in my presentation, but as far as I understand, BCS has not approved any methodology yet. I think BCS has published some guideline for what they require from CCS projects, but no specific methodology has not been approved yet.
Ms. Shinji, thank you for answering the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.